All right, algebra. Lesson 10 is actually a great continuation of lesson 9 from yesterday. So we're using the same data, the same randomly selected students, everything. So to begin, exploratory challenge number 1, extending the frequency table to a relative frequency table. That's what we're doing different today. Determining the number of students in each cell presents the first step in organizing bivariate categorical data. Another way of analyzing the data in the table is to calculate the relative frequency for each cell. Relative frequencies relate each frequency count to the total number of observations. For each cell in this table, the relative frequency of a cell is found by dividing the frequency of that cell by the total number of responses. So consider the two-way frequency table from the previous lesson. For instance, 450 people were surveyed. Actually, it was 1,000, but we have 450 samples. Were surveyed and asked to answer 2 questions. First of all, whether they were female or male. Secondly, whether they would want one of these superpowers. So, for instance, 49 women said that they would want to fly. 51 men said they would like to fly. 27 men wanted the power of invisibility, etc. So we have, erasing. We're going to take the data in this table and look at each cell, and we're going to find out the relative frequency of a cell by dividing the frequency of that cell by the total number of responses. Cool. So the relative frequency table would be found by dividing each of the above cell values by 450. For example, the relative frequency of females selecting to fly is 49 divided by 450, or approximately 0.109, which is to the nearest thousandth. A few of the other relative frequencies to the nearest thousandth are shown in the following relative frequency table. So, for instance, the total number of people that voted on freeze time, 131 divided by 450. Okay, the men that picked invisibility, or the total number of people that picked telepathy, or the total number of people that were females. Calculate the remaining relative frequencies in the table below. Write the value in the table as a decimal rounded to the nearest thousandth, or as a percent. So we're going to take, each one of those frequencies and do some division. So 51 over 450, or 100 over 450. Now I don't have space to do each one of these, so you're going to have to listen up and fill in. So females flying is 49 divided by 150, which is 0.109, or 10.9%. Total of males that picked to fly is 0.113, or 11.3%. Okay, and the total is going to be 0.222, or 22.2%. And the cool thing is, if we take 0.109 plus 0.113, I'm going to get 0.222, which is 22.2%. Okay, those add up. Right, I'm going to push pause and go ahead and calculate the rest of these. You may have a notes quiz, so I would make sure I write them down and know how they're calculated. I'm just going to take each one of these numbers and divide by 450. Every single one of them. Okay, I'm pushing pause. All right, some of these can be a little difficult to actually read, but the numbers are easily accessible for you and you can calculate them super quick. All right, moving on. Based on previous work with frequency tables, I don't know what previous work you would have, but we're working on them now. Which cells in this table would represent the joint relative frequencies? Joint relative frequency cells are represented by the unshaded. We talked about that yesterday. Unshaded cells are the joint relative frequencies. Which cells in the relative frequency table would represent the marginal relative? Okay, those would be the shaded cells. Those are called the marginal ones. We talked about them yesterday. Marginal relative. What is the joint relative frequency for females who selected invisibility as their favorite superpower? At this point, we're going to look at just the cell. We're looking at females for invisibility. The joint relative frequency we actually calculated as 0.107 or 10.7%. And that was their favorite superpower was invisibility. So that means about 11% of the students sampled were female. And they selected 11% of the students sampled were female who selected invisibility. What is the marginal relative frequency for freeze time? If you remember, that's the shaded area. So marginal for freeze time, that was 0.291 or 29.1%. So about 29% of the total students surveyed or sampled selected freeze time. It's a big percentage. They selected freeze time as their favorite superpower. What is the difference in the joint relative frequencies for males and for females who selected to fly as their favorite superpower? Remember the joint, that's the unshaded? Yep, the unshaded. So we're looking for the difference between the joint relative frequencies for males and females. I have 0.004. And the difference, hold on, let me get the actual numbers. I'm going to look them up really quick. So we're looking at fly. 109 was the female, and 0.113 was the male. If I take the difference of that, that gives me 0.004 as the difference, or 0.4%. Is there a noticeable difference between the genders and their favorite superpowers? I think there is. If you look, the most notable difference were in invisibility was big. Invisibility. Super strength was really big. And then telepathy was another big one. So yeah, I think there was a huge noticeable difference between them. All right, moving on. Let's figure out how to interpret this data. So interest in superheroes continues at Rufus King High School. The students who analyzed the data in the previous lesson decided to create a comic strip for the school website that involves a superhero. They thought the summaries developed from the data would be helpful in designing the comic strip. Only one power will be given to a superhero. A debate arose as to what power the school's superhero would possess. Students used the two-way frequency table and the relative frequency table to continue the discussion. Take another look at those tables. Scott initially indicated that the character created should have super strength as the special power. This suggestion was not well received by the other students planning this project. In particular, Jill argued, well, if you don't want to ignore more than half the readers, then I suggest telepathy is the better power for our character. Before we get into the questions, I want to look at the data a little bit and see if we can learn something. So if we go to telepathy, let's see, that was 26.2% of all students picked telepathy. 15.6% of them were females, and 10.7% were males. And the other one that we were talking about was that super strength. Super strength. So if we look at super strength, total of 5.8% picked super strength of all the students. 5.8%, so 5 points. Let's do it in the same order. 0.2% were female, and 5.6% were male. Interesting. Not sure why we'd pick that one. Let's go to the questions. Scott acknowledged that super strength was probably not the best choice based on the data. The data indicate that freeze time is the most popular power for a superhero, continued Scott. Jill, however, still did not agree with Scott and that this was a good choice. She argued that telepathy was a better choice. How does the data support Scott's claim? If we look, we already looked at at telepathy versus super strength. If I go back to freeze time, 29.1 of total kids chose freeze time. I've got 13.3% of females with two E's. Oops. And 15.8% of males. Cool. And then telepathy we already re-looked at. So how did the data support Scott's claim? Why do you think he selected freeze time as a special power for the comic strip fair? Freeze time was the most popular choice. Choice among the students as a whole. If I look, it was 29.1% for freeze time, and telepathy was 26.2%. So freeze time was the most popular. Number 9, how did the data support Jill's claim? Why do you think she selected telepathy as a special power for comic strip? Actually, telepathy was the most popular for females. So Jill would think that. Where freeze time was the most popular for all students, telepathy was the most popular for female students. Of the two special powers, freeze time and telepathy, select one and justify why you think it's a better choice based on the data. I mean, we could discuss this one till the cows came home. Answers vary. Really, we've got between 26% and 29% between telepathy and freeze time. More females selected telepathy, while more males selected freeze time, so there's lots of different reasons. So, lesson summary, categorical data, data that takes on values that are categories rather than numbers. Examples include male or female, superpowers, etc. Two-way frequency table is used to summarize bivariate categorical data. Relative frequency compares a frequency count to the total number of observations. It can be written as a decimal or a percent. A two-way table summarizing the relative frequencies of each cell is called a relative frequency table. The marginal cells are in a two-way relative frequency table are called the marginal relative frequencies, while the joint cells are called the joint relative frequencies. One is shaded, one is not. I'm sure you've written down which one is which.